I'm Yuri Kruman, the founder of Master the Talk Consulting, HR strategy and employee experience consultant, and Forbes Coaches Council member, contributor to Forbes, Entrepreneur, Business.com, and many other platforms. Today on the show, we dive deep into what millennials really want from work and life. Totally not what you expect. It's very different from what the media will tell you, and it's much more heartfelt than the usual conversation. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything: finding your purpose. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? Well, are you still complaining about millennials, about their entitlement? Well, here's a newsflash. Maybe they're not as different from the past generations as you would like to think. How is that possible, you ask? Stay tuned, you're about to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episode on our Facebook page. Just go look for Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast on Facebook. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, that's I guess now Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. And remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, where we go out all the way from Las Vegas to Georgia and a lot of places in between, including Washington, D.C. Also, you can look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. If you want to tune into us through Spotify or Google Home or Alexa, you can simply say, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you know that we have spoken many times about millennials and how what they want from work environment and from their employees seems to be very different than previous generations. Well, today we look at how you can discover what millennials really want from work and life. Along the way, our guest will debunk many of the myths around millennials and push back around some of the sensationalist media that's been put out about them. But let's get a look at how you can actually develop and keep your top millennial talent. If you want to find out how to do that, well, my guest on this particular episode is Yuri Kruman. Now, his background spans law, finance, neuroscience. Yuri is a deeply knowledgeable individual who has become a highly in-demand corporate HR and employee experience consultant. With startups, he's part of the Forbes Coaching Council, member and contributor of Forbes, Entrepreneur, Business.com, and many other platforms. His consulting and advising and coaching portfolio includes speaking engagements and advisory work that has imparted thousands of corporate startup executives. He is the author of a fabulous new book called What Millennials Really Want from Work and Life. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Yuri Kruman.
Dov, it's wonderful to be with you. Thanks a lot for having me on.
I'm happy to have you on here. I've been looking forward to our conversation. It's taken a while, but we are
Yes, it
here.
has.
We are
Yes, it
finally
has.
here. Now, you are in your fifth career.
Yep.
And yes, you're not 72 years old. So, you know, you've obviously fast tracked a lot of things. You've gone into neuroscience, law, finances. You've built startups, very successful startups. Let me ask you, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a firefighter, and you know what? That's what I became. Just totally not in a way that I expected. So I'm actually exactly half of that age. I'm 36. When I was a kid, I did a lot of different things, but I did have a startup idea. Even back in the Soviet Union, the first thing I wanted to do, believe it or not, this is hilarious. So we had to make long distance calls from the post office back there. And my mom would consult with my grandfather, who was a doctor. He was an ENT, you know, if anybody got sick. So one day I'm standing outside the post office waiting for my mom to, you know, finish her call with grandpa. And I look up at the walnut tree and I say, you know what if somebody took the nuts from that walnut tree and distilled iodine? That was my first
Really?
business idea. I didn't do much with it, you know, but
No,
that got the spark going.
that's amazing. So let's do two things here. Number one, I'm always fascinated by the people who've had influence on the influencers. And so one of the questions I love to ask is, who's a person who we likely wouldn't know, who's been a major influence on your life, who's impacted you, the way you are, how you are?
Mhm.
That, again, we may not even know who this person is.
Well, I mean, I clearly I want to cite my mother because you know, she's an incredible human being, a scientist, you know, someone who immigrated twice. You know, but those that I would say that's kind of an obvious one. Everybody would say their mother, their father. I would say that in a professional realm, there are two people. One is James Altucher. You might have heard of him. He's a man
Yep.
of many talents and many careers and many failed investments, but someone who really convinced me that my story is worth sharing, even though my story is worth. Um, it really goes through a lot of failures and a lot of ups and downs and things that maybe don't make a lot of sense. So I credit James with helping me to open up and really tell my story.
Fabulous. And so talk to us a little bit, just so that everybody has a bit of context here, because you mentioned the Soviet Union, you mentioned lining up at the post office to make a call. How old were you when you immigrated from the Soviet Union to the United States?
So I was 9 years old when we left Moscow to go to Kentucky, of all places, which is where I grew up.
That is beautiful. Like,
It
I
actually is a really
cannot,
beautiful place.
I know, but I cannot imagine a place more odd for a Russian kid to be than
Which is Kentucky.
Kentucky. Right?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Are you're from Moscow? Is that
That's right.
Moscow, Texas, or is that
No,
Moscow?
the real deal.
I know.
The one with the guy who was embalmed. You know that one.
Yeah, exactly. That is phenomenal. So you know, you said you wanted to be a firefighter when you were a kid, and you said that's actually what you became, but in a very different context. Talk to us a little bit about that. What it is that you feel you do that is firefighting in many ways.
So it's like this for myself. You know, this may sound lovely and very interesting on radio, right? Oh, 5 careers. You know, that's great. In real life, of course, it can be very traumatic. Those changes can come because of massive student debt. You know, I've been very open about talking about that side of things, living in New York City with that massive debt, having a family and a kid who's gone through some pretty serious health issues. So there's a lot of really kind of difficult, you know, beyond just kind of the obvious ups and downs of business itself that
Mm-hmm.
have gone into those changes. So in terms of firefighting, the first thing I think about is, you know, my own fires, the fires of, you know, where I came from and what I have to become and what I have to seem to all these different people in my life, whether, you know, at one point it was, let's see, my mom, my sister, maybe it's grandparents, maybe it's my friends. You know, a lot of people go through life always looking left and right. You know, it's never about who am I really, am I competing against my potential? It's always, well, there's my classmate, you know, who started a crazy tech company, or I don't know, Ivanka Trump, who was in my college class, and at some point it just becomes a silly exercise. Why
Right.
why am I doing that? And that becomes a fire, because when you compare yourself against other people, you tend to feel like garbage, right? You tend to feel like you're behind or somehow you're inadequate, and the fire starts. Problems
Mhm.
at work, problems at home, right? I'm always putting out fires. That's my life. And at some point you realize, okay, well, you know what? Maybe instead of putting out fires so much, maybe you should make your place with fire retardant material, and maybe you shouldn't keep so
Mhm.
many flammable materials around the house, and maybe you should close your mouth so the fire doesn't come out of there.
But
And that
when did you get um, the realization that you were living your life by comparison? And not only that, but it's one thing to get it, it's a whole different thing to step away from it, because
yeah.
we live in a comparative society.
Mhm.
Everything is constantly, I mean, we live in a social media world where everybody puts up their very best version of themselves, the shiniest, most pop, and it's got nothing to do with reality. So talk to us a little bit about that. You got it. Where did you get it? And what was it gave you the shift?
Sure. So, as lovely as this would sound on radio, that, I had my eureka moment, Yuri had his eureka moment, right? But that's not how it works, right? There are
Mm.
several inflection points where you slowly and progressively get sick of your own shit
Yep.
and your own bad reactions to things, and hanging out with the wrong people, and stepping into the same kinds of situations where you are not working with the right people, you're not aligned with what you're doing, and you're not doing the stuff that you really love and that you're really good at, and you're not
Mhm.
adding massive value, you're adding little breadcrumbs here and there. So
Right.
for me, it was progressively over, working for first being in grad school and being in a neuroscience program. I studied that in college. My mom was a neuroscience professor. So it was always kind of by inertia. Okay, I should go do this. I've done, summer research, very different in practice. And in that first
Mhm.
year, while I was in grad school, actually, I'm a very, optimistic guy, and I think I was depressed. I mean, I didn't get diagnosed, but I was in my room for most of a month. I didn't go to lab. That's probably not normal, right? And actually,
Might be a sign of depression. Just a little one.
might be. So in that month, believe it or not, even in that state, I built my first startup, which was, you're gonna love this one. It was called JuicyJews.com. It was a Jewish social network. If, so
That's so beautiful.
yeah, so basically, it gave me a taste of what it's like to build my own company. And even though it failed miserably, it really taught me that, what, I love building stuff and I love learning how things work and working with people. But okay, I'm a good immigrant boy. I need a grad degree. So,
Mhm.
I leave the program. Frankly, I was asked to leave. Like, look, you're a nice kid, but you don't belong here. And by the way, James
You just
Altucher,
didn't
same
have the
thing.
passion for the neuroscience. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I mean, I love learning this stuff, right? But it's not enough. You have to really love the practice and putting
Right.
blinders on and working in one area for many years. That was never my thing. I like to have my finger in 10 soups at the same time,
Right. I understand.
kind of like that crazy chef. So I left that, and okay, I need a grad degree. Let me go to law school. While I'm in law school, I'm doing everything from personal injury. Yeah, I admit it. I was in personal injury for a summer. I did insurance defense litigation. I was part of something called legal consulting. God knows what that is in practice. It's political consulting, actually.
Right.
And I was also working for a week at the New Yorker magazine, where I did fact checking. So totally bizarre stuff. And then at the end, I ended up in a hedge fund. I basically offered my services to my network of friends in finance, and someone says, "Hey, we got a hedge fund office in near New York. Why don't you go work there?" So I
Hmm.
did that, and I graduated into the recession, 2009, and I keep failing the bar exam. I failed it 4 times, supposedly being pretty smart guy, and the message was crystal clear: you're not meant to be a lawyer, buddy.
Right.
But I have that massive a quarter of a million in law school debt, so I got to do
Wow.
something about that. I had to move back home for 2 months, move back in with my mom. I couldn't handle more than 2 months because that was, it's a little traumatic. Moving back at 26.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine says, listen, come back, live on my couch. Another friend lent me his couch. So I was half the week on one, half the week on the other. And in that time, I met my wife. then, she didn't have a place to live either after graduating from her program at Columbia. So we're on a date one night, about 2 months in to dating, and I get an email from a friend. She says, "Hey, listen, moving out of my apartment, getting married. I want to keep this among friends. Anybody?" And I look at her, look at my now wife, Jennifer, and I'm like, "Look, we're both homeless. How about it? You want to move in? Want to move in together?" So she said yes.
Romantic. You romantic fool, you.
A romantic fool, man, I'm telling you. But hey, it worked out. the Hallmark version, everything works out magically right in the moment. But yeah, we moved in and I went to get a ring right away. And I was like, look, I'm not going to do this like American shtick of we're going to live together for a few years and test it out. No, I'm a serious dude. Love this woman and let's do this. Said, all right, let's do the civil stuff, because she was having visa issues as well. So it was kind of like the movie Green Card. I don't know if you ever saw that one. And we're living together and she's like, look, don't think that the papers mean anything. We got to go to Morocco and you got to meet my family. And, if you've never met Moroccans, it's very flavorful, very spicy. So here I am, this like Russian Ashkenazi kid going to Morocco and like using every last bit of his French skills to try to impress, his future mom-in-law and dad-in-law. So thank God it worked. And so I moved on. I worked in finance for a few years, and again, bad alignment. I'm not, that's not my thing. Moving to tech, and health tech was at least close to what I was studying and more my pace. But again, I keep running into people that promise me the world, help me drink the Kool-Aid, and I just, hook, line, and sinker, I end up in a bad spot, doing stuff that I frankly have no business doing, like walking off the street to a startup to do finance and operations. A VC-backed company, 50 people there. I have zero experience, straight up. I have never done finance and operations. It doesn't mean if you work in finance that you know finance and operations. It's quite different things. So I do that for a few months. I burn out. I learn like I've never learned in my life. And I convinced someone in a competing company. I beat my non-compete, et cetera. I got in there as a senior product manager, having never done product management. So, and I'm working with Harvard MBAs, Stanford MBAs. I'm in way over my head. I'm just like, okay, I can convince people to give me a chance, but I don't have the chops. I just don't do it. And the last one I worked in, I was director of special projects. It was going well. I invested, friends and family invested, but I had a conflict of personality with the founder. And I was like, look, I'm done. I'm so done with this. You can't even imagine how done I am with this. But hey, I've got a family, I've got the debt, and we have a second kid on the way. So, okay, my wife and I decided I'm going to do coaching because that seems to be something I'm really, really good at. I've always been good at it. Now let me monetize it. And that's how I started my company called Master the Talk Consulting. And after coaching several hundred people through career transitions, through becoming better leaders at work, and basically working not only with millennials, but that's the main contingent, mid-career millennials looking to really get back to basics and really do work that they're connected to. I realized that there's a lot of treasure in just having talked to so many people and understood what their pain points are. Why do they hate working in a bank or a large Fortune 500 company when they're getting paid tons of money? It's very prestigious. Everything seems to be great, right? But they hate it. They hate themselves. And then I realized, look, I'm sitting on a gold mine of data here and gold mine of understanding. And that's when I started doing HR consulting for companies that want to keep their people. And that's where this book came from. It came from partly my coaching and partly my findings also from consulting.
So let's dive into that a little bit here, because, you've just told us this, evolution of your own career. And I feel like in many ways, because you are, you're at the upper end of millennial age, you are a millennial.
Yep.
And not unlike many millennials, by this age, you've had several careers, as have many millennials. I wrote about that in Fiercely Loyal. And, you've got the student debt, which is a very common problem in millennial thing, going on. You've changed careers several times. And on top of that, you've got the immigrant mentality, which is a driving mentality and it can be very, very good. But I want to talk to this point now around millennials, because in the book, you really take a deep dive into the millennial psychology,
Mhm.
and the language using, and you've even used, like, you use the data points as you talked about, anecdotes and stories
Yep.
about what millennials really want out of their work. So talk to us a little bit about where Gen Xers and baby boomers are sort of caught in the myth of what millennials want
Mhm.
versus what you know from your research, from not only being a millennial, but from being somebody who was coaching those millennials who were coming to you and saying, here's what I want. What do they want? Like, this is the secret code that the baby boomers want to know. What the hell do these crazy kids want?
Money, only money. No, I'm only joking, of course. Look, so
Absolutely.
the myths are legion, right? First of all, there's a massive cottage industry around this. Who are millennials? What the hell do they want? All the industries that we've killed, all the, I don't know, the taste and sensibility that's disappeared, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole lot to pick apart here. I'll try to do a relatively
Sure.
concise job of that. So the first kinds of things that always come up are that millennials are flaky, they're entitled, they don't want to work, they just want to move up, give me, give me, right?
Yep.
That's the first thing. So other things include basically, okay, now you think the world is centered around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you don't want to put in your dues, right? All that kind of language.
Yep.
So a lot of it is basically nonsense. I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at where millennials are compared to where Gen Xers were and boomers were in terms of tenure, this is another sticking point. Oh, well, they're leaving every 18 months. If you look at the averages for where millennials are in terms of tenure, they're exactly the same as for Gen X and for boomers at that stage in their career. If you
So
talk,
let's just pull that up.
yeah,
So
yeah,
somebody is 30, 32,
uh-huh,
and they're a baby boomer, and they have you. What I'm hearing is that you're saying that the baby boomer has amnesia about where they were at 30, 32 in terms of loyalty, etc., and that they're
mhm.
projecting all that on millennials.
That's a big part of it, right? The other thing is, I think a lot of Gen Xers and boomers presume that economically, hey, it's a boom. Hey, it's 10 plus years of growth. So what the hell, guys? Come on. Like, why are you always asking for more money? What is this? And the point is that if you look at the numbers for how much an average have decent lifestyle costs for most millennials, especially in big cities, it's a massive red flag. I mean, look at the average price of a one bedroom in New York or San Francisco. Who in the hell can
Oh,
afford that?
Vancouver.
Or Vancouver, right? Or pretty much
Yeah.
any big city, right?
Mhm.
It's outrageous. Nobody
Yeah.
can make that kind of money unless, I mean, to be perfectly frank, if you look, this is partly anecdotal, partly also data in the book. Millennials that can afford to buy homes, they get help. Most of them have to get help from their
Sure.
parents.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a trust fund situation, but it's some kind of situation where they're getting help. And same story here in Brooklyn. I mean, the prices here are atrocious. And every time you scratch the surface, it's like, okay, gotcha. Okay, that's how you could afford that home. And it's not out
Mhm.
of envy or jealousy. It's just like, okay, let's put things in their rightful place.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
So when we're looking at this, so now you're saying that. So first of all, they have an amnesia about their own movement, mobility upwards for boomers and Gen Xers,
yeah.
and also where they were in the context of getting help in buying property, and uh, and of course, I mean, I think that we all forget that things were. I mean, there's the people say, well, things were much more reasonable then. No, they weren't. They were not more reasonable because the wages were less, and so it's all prorated, and that's part of what we got to realize is that a kid coming out of college today into $150,000 job seems insane if you're a baby boomer, because nobody would have paid you 150 grand. But no, but it's prorated. There was a big research done, this out of Dan Pink's research, which
Mhm.
said that the motivational amount of money is about $72,000. Well, I've argued that a bit, because here's the thing: it's not $72. It's a $72,000 lifestyle
Ah,
and
yeah.
lifestyle. And if you get 72 grand and you live in Vancouver or Manhattan, you can't live.
No,
You can't even rent.
bye bye.
You have to rent more than an hour outside of the city
Yep.
because a 1-bedroom apartment in the city is to rent is going to be 2,200 a month, right?
That's
Which is
not
going to
bad.
be
Maybe
in
you
New
should
York
move to
very soon.
Vancouver.
Uh,
Yeah.
so it's crazy prices. I mean, it's $1.3 million for a 600 square foot apartment downtown in Vancouver.
Yep.
So it's, I think we forget that back in my day, well, your day is irrelevant. It's
Hmm.
absolutely irrelevant. So, but there's also this piece around expectations, and I want to sort of look at that, because I
Yep.
think there are a lot of misunderstandings on both sides.
You
So
know it.
what millennials expect
Hmm.
and what baby boomers expect or Gen Xers expect from millennials. So I
Yep.
know you went into that a lot in the book. So talk to us a little bit about this misalignment of expectations, because we know misaligned expectations make people miserable.
Oh yeah. Well, so this is the core piece, right? So what do boomers and Gen Xers expect out of millennials? They expect them to follow their tried and true path, which means paying your dues, which means not making too much noise, which means just being fine with your progression and believing in a meritocracy. Okay.
Mhm.
And the reality is that millennials partly don't believe the bullshit. They know that on social media, everything is shiny and spiffy and wonderful, but behind that, people are suffering. I just saw an article the other day, right, that millennials are increasing in terms of their deaths from drugs, alcohol, etc. So part of that is society in general, that Western society doesn't really have a common purpose, and you have opioid addiction, and you have all sorts of really serious problems that are festering under the surface. And at the same time, millennials also, what do they expect? At the same time,
Mhm.
this thinking that, okay, well, Zuckerberg did that, or the guy who started Snapchat, Evan Spiegel, well, he did that, right? So there's this, it's creep, it's this creep drift of mentality that I can do that. Why not? I just need the one quick hit. Right. So I
Exactly.
want to go work for a cool startup. I want to have equity. I want to move quickly. Why should I be that schmuck who goes and pays dues? There's no reason for that. When
Mm.
you have all these guys glorified every day in the media, these millennials that took this path, and again, without context, maybe, Zuckerberg's dad had something to invest in his money, or Lawrence Summers, had something to invest or say there, right? Or people that go on the boards of these companies, right? When you shy away from that context, you have a completely wildly inaccurate picture of how this person built the company, or how this person got to be paid, $500,000 for being a brilliant coder, or for being an iBanker. All of this is out of context. There's nothing about language or psychology or cultural capital or where this person came from. Right. So the expectations are misaligned internally for millennials, because, some of that Kool-Aid, you do have to drink it. Otherwise, what are you going to
Yep.
talk about at dinner? And
Good
the
point.
the other piece is like, okay, well, I'm having to deal with debt. I'm having to deal with massive rises in housing costs. I'm having to deal with maybe not being able to afford a car, or a lot of those basic things that, like, my high school classmates back in Kentucky, they've taken for granted for like 15 years because it's a lot
Right.
cheaper there, right? So it's that kind of thing that gets to you, and you start saying, you know what, I'm behind. That's the
Mhm.
most simple thing. I'm behind because, let's say, I'm an old millennial. I went through the Great Recession. I didn't work for periods of time. I wasn't able to have a salary history that was consistent. I wasn't able to grow my career like somebody even 2, 3 years older that I went to college with, that graduated earlier.
Right.
I missed out on a pretty massive chunk of money because I didn't know how to negotiate, because I didn't grow up with that stuff. Right.
Yep.
So when you start adding up these little dribs and drabs, it's a lot that's missing. And that's the issue. It's not
Right.
just that we're entitled or flaky. Of course, that exists in whatever proportion in every generation, but is that we're really behind. We're really screwed and we want to catch up. And why the hell should I have to wait to quote unquote pay my dues when I see a way around? I see lots of ways out of this situation.
But I think that's you just brought up something that's very important for us to look at, is that, I'm a baby boomer, and I remember being told, I'm being asked if I paid my dues and being told I hadn't back in certain things years ago.
Sure.
So that's not new. But I think what is important is to realize, one of the things I talked about in Fiercely Loyal was, how do you pay dues? Because the way you paid dues back when I was a kid was you went and worked somewhere for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And so the question I ask leaders when I work with them is, well, okay, why did you go work there 10 years? And they go, to get experience, to learn what I needed to learn. And I go, great. Now, if I could go back in a time machine and give you access to all the ways to learn today that you didn't have then, would you spend 10 years at that company? And the answer is absolutely not. Why would you? You're Michiganer. That's crazy. Exactly. Nobody would do that. If you can learn faster, why wouldn't you? And that's one of the things I love about millennials, is they learn faster and they find ways around, and they're not willing to waste their freaking time. My wife, she's not a boomer, and she's not a millennial. She's older Gen Xer. But my wife, she's the handyman of the house. You know how? She goes on YouTube. I don't go on YouTube. It's something to do with our faith. Men are not allowed to do this stuff.
My wife's an engineer. I feel your pain.
So my wife goes on YouTube and she works out how to fix it.
Yep.
Well, and there are people who've built careers on stuff they learned in YouTube. Why not? This is the entrepreneurial world. I love that about millennials, is that they are more entrepreneurial because of that. And I think that that's part of what we've got to get over. So before we go into that, is your book is What Millennials Really Want from Work and Life. Is the book written for millennials to sort of get a perspective, or is it written for Gen Xers and baby boomers to sort of go and wake them up a little bit? And so these people are not that different than you.
Yeah, it's very much mostly for the latter group. It's really, a lot of it is for business leaders, especially. The way I look at this is that for many reasons, business leaders are the ones that have to pick up the slack for government policy not being there, for public institutions not teaching kids the right skills for the workforce. So it's kind of like the group of last resort that has to deal with the gap in practical skill education and things like that. And they are the ones that also have this gap in really understanding millennials, understanding all of the different forces that went into who we are, how we communicate, what we demand, why we can demand it, right? It's not just how the labor market looks. It's also all of these other things, right? That we went through that they may not understand because, they're older and more set in their ways.
Yeah, and again, you brought up something else there that I think is really important, and I've spoken about this a lot because I think it's important, and that is, it's what I call Monty Python. But what I mean by it is, are you a Monty Python fan?
Believe it or not, yes.
Yeah, right. Well, so you're a millennial, but I didn't assume. So, but there's a wonderful scene, wonderful sketch, and it's where one of them is saying, how terrible it was when he was a kid. And he says, luxury. It's called the luxury sketch. Luxury. You used to dream of that. You used to lick road clean with tongue, walk 14 miles in barefoot. Oh, you were lucky. We had to, and it was, and I think that's part of what we forget.
Yep.
Is that there is the trauma my mother faced and the struggles my mother faced. She can look at my life and go, wow, it's so easy and it's such a blessing. I can do the same with my children and even my grandchildren. And I think that's part of what happens generationally with work. We go, well, it's easy for you guys because you've got YouTube and you've got these other platforms. But we forget that, like you said, you came out of college with crippling debt, and the Great Recession that made many people unemployed, no work, nothing to do. And you got a 200 grand or a 300 grand debt behind you. How the hell do you make a start with that? So I think that this is one of the things that you make a great point here, is that the understanding that we all carry our burden,
Yep.
but we all look at our burden as the most important burden. And we don't look at them and go, oh, millennials, yeah, because it seems very easy for them if you're looking at it from the perch of being a baby boomer.
Absolutely. Look, part of this is that, let's not forget, I mean, in America, I think in Canada as well, there's this Protestant work ethic. It's kind of like, you work hard, you will succeed. You work hard, you will succeed. Well, we're very late in the curve of civilizational progression in the West, right? And at this point, the fig leaf has been removed from nepotism. It's been removed from a whole bunch of different industries where things really work in more mysterious ways, which means really simple ways, right? Whether it's college admissions, whether it's how to get a job in finance, how to learn the language of negotiation. And for me, yeah, okay, I'm a scrappy immigrant, congratulations, right? I had to learn a lot of those things myself. And part of it is because I'm from the Soviet Union. You don't really trust other people because we never had this thing that it was all about the common good, which we knew was BS, right? Here, it was like, okay, you're an individual, you work hard, you get somewhere. And the practical truth is always in the middle, that you can't really just rely on yourself. That's bullshit. And, it can't all be about the common good. However, in the US, at least, there was a time not too long ago when, politicians of both sides, of all stripes, at least tried to enunciate some sort of common purpose. What are we all here to do? Even if it's just against the Soviet Union or whoever the hell else, right? Now it's gone. It's nothing. It's like, okay, either you paint yourself with Trump or you paint yourself with the other side, and that's it. Nobody cares an iota to find out who are you really, the nuance. Those days are done. And that's sad.
It's very sad, but and I couldn't agree with you more. But we're still back at the fact of, well, okay, so yeah, I see that there is an extreme hard right, and there is an extreme hard left, and a very quickly disappearing middle, but that is also demonstrated in that there is an increasing 1%, an increasing very low end, and the middle is disappearing across the world in so many ways. The rise of strongman leaders, whether it's in Brazil or whether it's in Venezuela, or where countries we might not even realize, but places like Hungary, it raised in Germany, it's raised in France, certainly raised in America, it's raising in Australia, countries we wouldn't think of like that, the Philippines for sure. So this, for me, this is a big thing that we're seeing happening. And it's interesting because I think, and I really want to talk to you about this, because this is something I see that it's interesting for me, because on one side we're hearing this is an old white problem. The old white people are putting this hard right thing in place. But on the other side of it, we're hearing, no, this is a millennial problem. The socialist, leftist millennials, so again, we've got this division that's using generations to create the division between us. And where has your research showed where we're really at with all this?
I think for me, I don't think this is just my bias. This is pretty objective. If you look at where the 1% is concentrated, it's in a gerontocracy. I mean, this is just how it is, right? The system is set up, part of it is through gerrymandering. Part of it is through economic influence of elections. Part of it is through the concentration of power in states, right? So that the erosion of the value of a vote in any election by any one voter has been dramatic, even in the last 20 years. So, those forces, plus just look at who's in Congress. Most of those people don't really know, they don't remember, maybe they never went through a tough time. I mean, frankly, right? A lot of them are either dynasties or some kind of familiar relations, right? And it's this kind of thing which is now out in the open. And you might have a few millennials, you might have our local fan favorite Cortez, right? But I mean, I don't know. She doesn't seem like she knows all that much about practical policy. She knows a hell of a lot about struggling in New York, and that's
Sure.
worth something. But the kind of middle centrist ground is lost. There's no conversation that can be had without being blown over by one side or the other.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. I'm seeing that, politically, I'm seeing it in power, but I'm seeing it in business.
Mhm.
So from your research, how do you see that let's go back to being in the business world. How do you best empower employees to do the best work they can possibly do for us? Do you see a need for humanization and systemization? What is the connection that we need to get?
Yep. So part of this comes from the world of HR, right? HR, which usually is a four-letter word for pretty much every business leader, because okay, it's not a, it's not a revenue driver. It's usually something that's incredibly staid. It's all about the status quo. People hate it. Business leaders hate it. It's just like this necessary layer of, legal and compliance and all of that. And slowly, it's been turning around for a lot of companies. And
Mhm.
this isn't just for best companies to work for. This is out of necessity, because in a very competitive job market, you have to be able to attract top talent using not just gimmicks or branding. You actually have to start caring. God forbid, you actually have to care about the people. And the reason is because, well, they're going to get the hell out of here because there's always something better, right? Somebody actually cares enough to maybe pay off their student loans a little bit at a time and not give them some foosball table that they don't care about, right? Or cover their health insurance really profoundly so that they don't have to worry about catastrophic coverage, right? So it's that kind of minimal thought given to, okay, how do I see my people as my biggest asset, not my biggest liability? And then how do I incentivize them to do their life's best work by taking care of a lot of those, big problems like, okay, how do I pay for rent? So maybe either you subsidize their rent or you help them, maybe you get them some kind of guarantee so they can get an apartment, right? You help them to learn and grow quickly because they're in a rush. They want to learn and they want to move on to the next thing, right? You give them clear career pathways within your company, right? If they don't know what the hell they're doing there, when they're going to get promoted, they're going to get paid more, they're going to go elsewhere, because that's by far the best way to promote your career, to go get paid more, at least 10% more, 15, 20 in another company, right? So it's this kind of thing where there's no longer you're trying to keep a lid on something. It's instead, okay, this is a new world. I have to play by the rules as the business leader. I have to actually care. I have to listen, and I have to empower my people, and I have to trust them that, what, even if they're here for only 3 years on average, right?
Sure.
Even the best companies, your Googles, your Facebook, Salesforce, they can only keep their best people on average for 3 to 4 years, if that.
Yeah.
So while they're here, how do you empower them to ramp up quickly, to not worry about all of those kinds of basic necessities, right? Help them to go up in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs at work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And once you get them there ASAP, help them to grow, send them to conferences, give them Coursera, whatever, right? And coach them. This is one of the most underrated and simplest things that all millennials really need. And let's be honest, all people need. All people have always needed this, but they've never gotten it because they couldn't demand it, and it seemed to be a luxury just for executives. No more.
Sure.
We're not in that world anymore. Now, I think most savvy business leaders understand that new managers have to be good coaches, so I have to train those new managers. And I have to usually bring in coaches from the outside because people are not comfortable sharing with their manager things that may be in their mind. So there's this increasing also adoption, just the way the labor market's working, bringing outside talent, coaches and consultants on a project basis,
Right.
right? So there's much more of that mindset. Okay, how can I more quickly solve a problem? Let me get a small team together, the two pizza rule, let them, do their thing quickly, solve the problem, maybe reassign them to another team, help them learn more. So there's much more mobility even within functions, within projects. And that in itself, I think, is a positive development because it gives you lots of skills, a problem to solve quickly. You pick up as much as you can and you move on. You don't always have the same boss in practice.
Now, your coaching is called Master the Talk. So just tell us why that is the title, because I think that you and I talked about it before, and I think it's
Yep.
vital that people actually understand why you've called it that.
Mhm. So thank you for bringing this up. It's actually, I'm actually writing a book on this very subject. It's called Mastering the Talk to Master Your Life. So the premise is that instead of going out and thinking that you can sort of design everything by best practices in your life, right? So it's really, I talk about 4 conversations that all of us are always having, some
Mm-hmm.
successfully, some not as much, but all of us must have not just one conversation about, well, how do I negotiate better? How do I get this business deal? How do I talk to other people, right? How do I
Mm-hmm.
learn the magic language and psychology, that you've mastered or whatever? It's about 3 other conversations. You have to master your conversation with your body. You have to have good health, and you have to really understand what's going on with you, right? You have to
Right.
do that with your mind. Who am I? Where am I going? Then you think about, how do I get there? What's my place in the world? Why have I gone through the things that I've gone through? Whom am I meant to serve? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
then you go to that conversation. Okay, how do I conduct a conversation with others? Whether it's a negotiation, it's an interview, it's any interaction. How do I find a spouse? How do I raise my kids? Right? That's a critical conversation, but it can't be had in a vacuum from everything else. And
No.
then the last one, this one's not gonna win me any popularity contest, but for me it's critical, right? As someone who's an observant Jew, for me, I have to have a conversation with God, or some people might
Mm-hmm.
call it the universe, right? I need to know, why am I here? What's my purpose? I need to understand those big picture things, because what I do in my job, oh no, another millennial, right? Millennials see their work as an expression of themselves. So if I'm working for a company that's, I don't know, mining blood diamonds, I'm going to feel like crap, and I'm going to want to get the hell out of there.
Sure.
Right? So it's that kind of thing where my work is a part of me. And ironically, as I mentioned earlier, millennials are workaholics. If you look at the average number of hours millennials work, they work more
Mhm.
than Gen Xers and boomers. They can't
Absolutely.
get out of there. There's even something called vacation shaming, for crying out loud,
Yep.
right? Hey, open vacation policy, take as much as you can. And nobody takes a day because they don't want to be the first.
No. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, the one of the things I've said that I really like about millennials is that um, there's a good side to bad side to it, but on the good side is that they understand that work-life balance is absolute crap. It's never going to work. There is no such thing.
Yep.
But they understand work-life blend,
Yep.
and that they understand that my friends are not out there and my
Mhm.
workmates are here. So they want an environment where, as you said, they're doing meaningful work that aligns with their values, that is connected to them. But they also want to be working with people that they actually enjoy, and that
Yep.
they can go on the football machine with to take a brain break for 10 minutes, because that's a person they actually would want to spend some time with, because they understand what we have in previous generations have struggled with is like, well, how do I create the balance?
Mhm.
Stop separating the two worlds. There is no separation. And
That's
and
right.
I argued a lot for it in Fiercely Loyal, because I'm very pro millennial. Is
Mhm.
what I love about them is, you can call them entitled up the yin yang. You do that. That's okay. But you should know that this is the generation who volunteers more of its time with no fee than any other previous generation. So
Yeah.
that falls in the face of entitlement. You can't be entitled and give all your time away to causes that you care about. Yeah, it's a bit of a moral struggle there for those boomers who want to judge them. We are coming close to the very end of the show, and I want to make sure that we let people know how to get in touch with you and all the wonderful resources that you have. But before we do,
Mhm.
let me ask you very quickly, what is a guilty pleasure for Yuri?
Travel is my biggest guilty pleasure.
Is it
Chocolate and
really?
all that stuff, yeah, but no, really, it's travel. That's my thing.
Is
Wish I
there
could do
a
more.
particular kind of travel or particular kind of place you like to go to?
I love to go hiking. I love cities just as much. I don't know that there's any particular theme, but far from the beaten track, something that's not going to be with a group. Ugh. And most importantly, I love traveling with my wife, because she's someone that really shares that kind of adventure with me.
That's fabulous. Thank you. So before we hand you over and just have you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and your resources, please, one of the things I love to get from my guests is tell us a really piece of practical advice that you want to share with our audience that they can go put into action today, whether if they're a baby boomer, a Gen Xer, or whether they're a millennial. What is it, something you would want them to go do so they really take this on?
There's a lot I can give. I will say this, it's a little bit different from what I usually say. It's the old wisdom, when you assume, you make an ass of you and me, right? I think both sides of this conversation assume a hell of a lot about the other party. And the simple truth is, a lot of us have common needs, common purposes, common goals. And when you presume that someone, is an old fart and doesn't get anything, that's garbage. That's total nonsense. You're missing the person that has gone through all kinds of fascinating experiences that you should learn from. And the same thing goes from the top down, right? When you're older and you're forgotten that, hey, I was younger once, I struggled, I didn't know what the hell I was doing or where I was going, then you don't give the credit, you don't give the room for younger people to make mistakes, to, knock their head on the wall and experience all that on the way to figuring out who they are and what they're meant to be. And I think that by itself is a great shame, and it's something that should be fixed. The simplest way to fix most problems in a company is communication, but specifically get the other person to tell you their story. Get vulnerable. It solves 80% of all problems. Without systems, without some kind of crazy consultants, that's the number one way. Get people talking.
I fully agree with you, and I will add to it by saying that as the leader, whether you are a millennial, a Gen Xer, or a baby boomer, as the leader, remember, leaders go first. So don't expect your people to be vulnerable unless you're going to be vulnerable first. You have to lead by example, be vulnerable. It is the most powerful loyalty tool there is. I wrote all about it in Fiercely Loyal. I think that vulnerability is your greatest power. Let people in, let them see the struggle, because then they go, okay, you're not different than me, we can align. That's a very important point. Thank you so much, Yuri. Listen, it's been a pleasure and honor having you on the show, mate. I love having our conversations. Please tell our listeners and viewers where they can find out more about you, your book, and all your wonderful resources.
Tremendous pleasure, Dov, really. I want to give people two websites. One is for my coaching site, which is masterthetalk.com. That's self-explanatory. The other one is more about consulting and speaking and all the other things that I do, writing as well. That's yurikruman.com. That's YURIKRUMAN. And thank you again.
Hey, it's been absolutely a pleasure, my friend. Loved having you on the show. Thank you for all that you've shared. And we will definitely make sure that we post those links on the show notes so that people can find you. Again, you can track Yuri down by yurikruman.com. That is YURIKRUMAN.com or masterthetalk.com. Again, like I said, we'll make sure we post them. And if you want to chat with other conscious leaders about this show or any past episodes, you can simply do that inside of our Facebook group. Just look for Dov Brown's Leadership and Loyalty podcast right there. Remember, the research consistently shows that the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize that they're spending an absolute fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in the training and development of your talent only to have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Matrix like the movie, no triple W's, just matrix like the movie.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197, and you get to really test and find out where your strengths are in the 5 areas of leadership. And remember, you can catch us on Alexa and Google by just simply saying play Dov Brown podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, Stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you might be assuming way too much about another generation. Get curious about how your vulnerability can bond you and your people together to create a greater work environment. I'm Dob Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, purpose, and focus in your business, life, and leadership impact. And I am out.